Hello, and welcome to another edition of Around the Coin. My name is Faisal Khan. I'm your host for this show. Joining me today is Scott Robinson, who is the founder and VP of Plug and Play Fintech, the financial technology focused startup innovation hub in California. Hi, Scott. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. Thanks again for having me.
Scott, as I understand it, you're the founder and VP of Plug and Pay, which is a fintech financial technology focused startup innovation hub based in California. You're making quite the waves these days on social media and everything else. So tell us a little bit, before we get into your Plug and Play thing, just tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get started? How did you come up of this idea of establishing a hub, and what prompted you to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a California kid. I went to UCLA and graduated in 2008, so right in the midst of that big crisis. And so, luckily, I got out a quarter early. I'd stacked a number of my classes, and that meant I had a little bit of an edge in some of the job-seeking opportunities, which were slim to none at that point. And when I jumped into the workforce, the only job I could find was basically a purchasing and facilities role in Santa Barbara for a large staffing company, which held maybe 400 retail locations around the country. And so, of course, that was a very frustrating job, and it was a very difficult time in that industry. But in the evenings, I learned how to code. And through the course of a few years working there, one day I decided I would run a utility audit, and I ran a script against some of the utility consumption based on square footage. And so I was looking for things like BTUs or water consumption, et cetera. And through that, the scripting brought up pretty interesting anomalies. And the point being is, as I learned how to kind of indoctrinate, how to work on the accounting software, it was Mass 500 and PeopleSoft. Became clear to me that technology was really important. And so actually, as a result of that audit, I uncovered a pretty significant embezzlement scandal, and from there I opted to join startups. So I moved back from Santa Barbara to the Bay Area and began working in a number of different early stage startups, ranging from roles of front-end, back-end development, business development, fundraising, et cetera. And over the course of a few years, I had worked with a number of startups, one in the sports kind of recruiting space, another in the domain of general commercial real estate listings and education. And all the while, some of my colleagues at UCLA had been delving into this thing called Bitcoin. And so I got this text one day from a colleague of mine who's a developer. He's like, "Hey man, there's this thing called Bitcoin, and while it's primarily being used for buying drugs right now, it's pretty interesting. Here's the white paper." And so I dove deep into that from a technical perspective, and it really struck a chord for me, because when I was in education, and one of the big challenges was top-down approach into the K-12 market, which was very fragmented and basically required a lot of money to make impact. And our goal was to enable opportunity to bring students from around the world aligned to the kind of varying standards for each of the curriculums, so that they'd be able to matriculate easily into the United States. And so anyhow, when reading the Bitcoin white paper, it became very clear that this was an interesting way that I could impose and help encourage opportunities for folks around the world. And that's really kind of how I segued on the side. I think, I was at the point after this education company working here at Plug and Play as a consultant. So I actually joined Plug and Play probably 2013-ish, early 2013, doing their consulting work for Salesforce and website. And then all the while, I had been attending a local meetup here that Roger Ver ran, the Silicon Valley Bitcoin meetup, so the first in the world. And, back then it was maybe 15, 20, scraggly bearded folks that were trying to overthrow central governments. And, I think one of the
libertarian dream, right?
That's right, the crypto anarchist. But I've always kind of had a very level-headed understanding of, what this might mean. And, while I have idealists, I think, aspirations, there's also a very realist side to me. And what I saw was a pretty significant opportunity to make an impact in the way financial services function globally. And so, Roger, go ahead.
And that also comes because you're a history major. You get to see how certain events are repeating themselves, or how certain events shape the events of the future. So I guess the education in history does help, right?
Absolutely. It's funny. A good friend of mine, Scott Hartley, he worked for David Allen, who's on the White House team a couple years back. But anyhow, he has a book called The Techie and the Fuzzy. And so a couple of points he brings up in that book which I would say from my experience is very true, is the fuzzy side, in this case, the historical understanding of why people write things and who's writing them to what audience, very, very relevant when it comes to both technology, politics, governance, and then, of course, your ability to really kind of impact the way to change things. And so, I thought I would be an attorney when I got out of UCLA, and I'm very glad I did not take that path. But as a result of that kind of historical context, yes, I think I can see a number of trends that are highly applicable to the change and disruption we're watching right now.
Yeah, because I think, that I've been reading quite a few books. There is obviously one called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. There is the history of the autobiography of money and so forth. And it's so in your face that we have such a short-term memory as to why things are the way they are. We seem to forget events that happened 30 years ago, let alone 300 years ago, and monetary aspects, fintech, what it's trying to do in the payment space, in the banking space, which is not, in many ways, not too old, 600 years, depending on how you look at it. History certainly helps put all that into perspective.
That's right. And, it was a really interesting kind of paradigm to look at Bitcoin and understand kind of the underlying definitions and features and characteristics of fiat and how money has worked over the years. So, I would say it served me well. I'm glad I did my historical reading in class.
How do you feel, because you were one of the... I don't know if the earlier pioneers, adopters, believers of Bitcoin. How do you feel now that you see what's happening all around you? Do you feel like the Vincent Cerf of the internet?
I have to say I do. I was very lucky to have had a neighbor who worked with Steve Jobs, both at Apple, at Next, and then back at Apple. And I got to watch through the years how, and this was probably 93 through like 99, how technology was shifting, and he had a patent on the stylus, so he was very well involved and understood kind of the implications of what the internet meant at that time frame. And so I think, certainly when we look at what Bitcoin and blockchain represents, and there's a level of irony here for me as well, is because when I was here at Plug and Play, we basically took that Bitcoin meetup and turned it into my 20% project, a Bitcoin accelerator. And then from there, as we heard some of the strategics opting to invest in, I think at the time it was either Coinbase, Zappo, or Ripple, it became clear it was important that, hey, this thing might be hitting mainstream, and therefore we should kind of extend the reach and the overall arcing umbrella of what we're looking at when it comes to financial services. And so then we pivoted from my little Bitcoin accelerator program into financial technology. And of course, we've maintained a Bitcoin and blockchain track, and now, of course, the irony is a lot of this is coming straight back to me. So we have a lot of questions, inquiries, not only from financial services, but from varying industries that we work in.
And when was it that you sort of transferred from the Bitcoin domain into the blockchain domain? Because that seems to be the main focus of whatever is happening out there today.
That's right. So we made the public shift December 2nd, 2014, the day after one of our portfolio companies, Lending Club, had their IPO. And we really felt like it was a good time to announce. And then in proper, we brought in our first few financial institution partners and our first startup cohort in February of 2015. But that was the first time we properly created a vertically or consortium-like based program meant to service startups and expedite their business development process, particularly for those that are enterprise-facing. And then meanwhile, survey and understand industry, and so glean a lot of the use cases and challenges that these folks are facing across varying markets.
And how many co-founders in Plug and Play?
So I'm the co-founder of the Fintech initiative here. Our CEO, Saeed, and I can give a brief anecdote as to how we got into this business by way of found. But our CEO, Saeed Amidi, is, we effectively are a family office, but he is, if you ever worked a term, a serial entrepreneur, that's the guy. His family has been in varying businesses ranging from commercial real estate. So if you know of Palo Alto's University Avenue, he's got a lot of property there and had it through the 90s. And then as well as a rug import-export business. So there's a number of Persian rug galleries throughout the world. He's got a plastics business where he does quite a lot of business with Exxon, and a water bottling business in Portugal where he has a pretty significant market share. And so the family over the years has really had their hands in many kind of varying, interesting, highly industrialized, or in this case, many supply chain or value chain related industries. And so as luck would have it, in the 1990s, one of those buildings, we call it the Lucky Building, 165 University, He had a little extra office space and was watching a lot of his colleagues on Sandhill making good investments and great returns. And so he opted to open this up for uncreditworthy entrepreneurs. And so, as luck would have it, the folks that took office space included Pierluigi Zappacosta from Logitech, Max Levchin and Peter Thiel from PayPal, Larry and Sergey from Google. And later, another funny story is Andy Rubin dropping by and looking for, actually, I believe it was a rug. And they haggled over the relationship there for some time, at the cost, I should say, of that rug. And at the end of that conversation, I think Saeed and some of his colleagues found out Andy was working on basically the operating system for the T-Mobile Sidekick. And so with those quick success stories and investment, as well as kind of building out an ecosystem, we took the facility here in Sunnyvale, our headquarters, in 2006. And so initially this was a co-working space play, a line of sight effectively to see how the entrepreneur operates, without being, I guess, a direct line of sight really for the investor. And so we were able to, I think, begin with a very large space. So this building has 180,000 square feet. Currently 450 plus startups sit here. And we've built many services on top of that. But initially it was just an incubator program, very similar to YC, so early stage, idea stage like startups. And then thereafter, we kind of opted into the corporate innovation space because a number of these folks became, that we would get inquiries as it relates to how we might optimize their strategy or help with deal flow and so forth. And so since that started roughly 2008, 2009, in 2013, after a number of relationships, typically an exclusive partner, exclusive corporate, and we had a conversation with a great guy named Michael Calvert from KKR. And after he had reviewed our portfolio, he said, guys, you have a lot of activity in retail. Why aren't you trying to create not only a channel relationship across the most active and most kind of relevant infrastructure players, but how do we optimize startup success rate in bringing them to these folks and solving their problems? And so we launched our retail program under this consortium model in fall of 2013. And since then, we're now up to roughly 12 verticals, each with the respective grouping of F100, F500 corporates around them. And the unique value proposition that we offer, for the most part, is our accelerator program, which is one of many offerings to the startup. Doesn't necessarily require equity. So startups get the opportunity early through growth stage to sit in an office right next door, to my friends at Deutsche Bank or Banco do Brasil or any of the other folks that office with us here. We have about 40 different financial institutions that sit right here on site. So it's a really interesting model in the sense that we really try to empathize with the entrepreneur in understanding that, look, time is everything to them, and if we can in one way or another expedite a no or in some cases a yes, that's basically life or death for the startup. So it's a very important element to us to make sure that we are truly bringing results and, more importantly, opening doors and putting these startups in positions to be successful.
And if you said you have 12 verticals to work with, do startups have an option to work in these, or can they bring their own? I mean, what I'm asking is, are you saying, listen, retail commerce or whatever, this is an area, these are some of the people we have, Fortune 500 players in there, go talk to them, see if they have a problem we can solve. Or you say, listen, the startup may already have a retail problem that it's trying to address, and you sort of introduce them to the 500 Fortune 500 retail companies that might be in your vertical.
Sure. So it's actually a little bit of both. The general process for how we select startups and so forth is actually kind of bilateral. So number one, we'll survey all of our corporate partners effectively, once a quarter or more. They'll be here typically between 4 to 6 times a year, or they'll be housed here on site. Or we have many locations throughout the world. I think 23 at this point. So they'll dictate not only a technology interest area, but as well as specific use cases. And we found over the years that it's important to understand that there's certain environments for which it's relevant to have kind of a line of sight for education versus, say, an off-the-shelf offering from a startup that's experienced, validated, and certainly the type that could enter into a relationship with a large F100 global entity. And so we do a little bit of both in the sense that we'll survey these interests and then proactively go source companies early through growth stage that are relevant for that, as well as basically take in and matriculate through all of our different locations startups that may have interest to begin with. So it's both sourcing as well as inbound. To the startup, the value proposition is really, hey, here's free office space and fully integrated pipeline expediting process. So we'll put you in a position where it's not the innovation, say, associate that's talking to you. It's the person that has already pre-selected a technology interest, a use case, and has seen your information. So there's an already existing interest of that relationship. But again, I think, when you look at how difficult it is for corporate innovation, there's very clear challenges. One is the pace, and secondly is just, when you deal with a large organization, how do you optimize all the constituents and stakeholders required to push through a technology? And so that's one of the big lessons we've learned.
The pace is, I think you're right on the money on that one, because that is not easy to deal with, especially when startups are basically working in a field where they think they have, X many months and they have to raise so much capital, and then they'll, have an exit or something like that. It doesn't work with F100 like this. Not
That's
at all.
Right. That's exactly right.
Takes a year just to sort of get their attention at times,
Yeah, and so, I remember this feeling exactly. You've got 6 months left in burn. You have a potential pilot. It may be paid, may not be. If it's not paid, you make sure you're getting that as a referenceable pilot, so I could say I'm working with XYZ entity. But yeah, if I put all my development team onto this proof of concept or pilot and it does not convert, that could be the end of the company. And so we do our best to really, if we know that there's perhaps not a great match, or for whatever reason it doesn't, we want to get a no immediately. I don't want the entrepreneur and the entrepreneur's team to really waste any of that time, but more importantly, we have to be founder friendly if we're going to be successful in what we do here. So that's a very important element to this.
How unique is your setup vis-a-vis, let's say, the others, the other incubators, accelerators, nomenclature notwithstanding? But how different is it?
Well, I think number one, because we have a concentration of all these different verticals here on site at one location, that's a pretty unique offering, and so we see really a lot of interesting cross-pollination between these varying verticals. So, for example, there's a couple use cases right now we're working on where we see crossover with blockchain and the autonomous vehicle, or on the other side, compliance and identity as it may relate to a health insurance offering, or KYC and compliance, for the consumer that's being onboarded at a bank or financial service offering. The reality is because we're stage agnostic, the quick wins are often perhaps not a monetary value to us, but to us it also means that this is a great kind of learning curve for the startups that perhaps are a little bit more immature or earlier than these startups. So when you see the lay of the land out there, there's a lot of programs that are fantastic for those that are at idea stage, and it's kind of their first run of the mill, and things that you would focus on like you would in an incubator. Your path to market, how your product and market match looks, building out your actual prototype, building the pipeline for your enterprise, your consumer base. But for us, I think we don't like to think as though we're competitive to folks. If there's any point of competitive or competition, it would probably just be the first check into the company. But yeah, the other offering is, again, we don't take equity. So we'll opportunistically invest, and we kind of want it to be in a scenario where it's really a pull kind of environment. So if you want our money, that's great. Come to us. We're not going to force it on you. And I think the other side of this is some of the challenges often for those that go through, say, a specific or exclusive program. Often that may mean that they've kind of been red flagged by any other entity that's competitive to that one partner. So there are some, I think, nuances that make that really, I think, difficult for a startup to scale globally for a relationship that may have started with, say, one bank many years ago with their one particular data set.
What's the average age?
That's a great question. It ranges. We've seen, I'd say, okay, well, I can make an easy answer. On the Bitcoin blockchain side, it's probably below 30.
Yeah.
On the other side, so you can imagine then to the same tune, anyone in compliance is typically an older group, or arguably 20 to 40 is really kind of the mainstay. But we have a lot of folks that are from many walks of life here.
And are your startups predominantly stateside, or have they come from abroad, from Europe or Israel or South America or Middle East, etc.?
So one of the big pushes in the past 2 years specifically has been scaling us globally. So for example, of this last cohort, I'd like to say we received applications from over 20 different countries. And I think that's perhaps one of our strong suits in kind of offering to the folks around the world. Is this kind of process of tech transfer. So we launched, for example, in Paris, a program with BNP Paribas which launched earlier this year. So we've gone through our first cohort with them, and we'll be stationed at actually Station F. So that's a pretty exciting facility there that'll be opening up in a short period of time. But yeah, the reality is a lot of these folks that are building products are from all over the world. And so with that, we have 23 locations, offices in varying kind of form and function. So for example, we work with Axel Springer in Berlin or Daimler in Stuttgart with the Startup Autobahn program. And so tech transfer, frankly, is one of the kind of the big value propositions for us in being able to create soft landings and bridges between these activities. So
these satellite offices are what are they like? I mean, is it like a hub and spoke operation? Eventually, the spoke will connect to the hub.
That's right. So, for example, in this first cohort that we had at Paris, 10 startups came through. I believe 3 were French. The rest were from varying different Europe and American locations. So, I'd like to say 2 came from the U.S. to Paris. So yeah, this is a very very interesting area for us because we feel there's a lot of opportunity, particularly in like the very kind of consistent, I'd say, products that will hit market. So for example, we invested in a company called N26 a number of years ago through the Axel Springer relationship, and so
wow,
yeah, that was a good one. I believe we were the first check into them. But the reality is we see a very similar process of a challenger bank making, of course, nuance to the respective market, but very similar feature sets, the mobile banking offering. And so that's kind of the mindset is, well, not only can we help the startup, match against that current respective market, but where else can we bring them? And I think, the best example that I can think of off the top of my head actually does not come from our fintech activity, but from our relationship with a company called TruckPad. So think of TruckPad as kind of like Uber for truck drivers. We worked with them down in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We were working there by way of some of our colleagues at Porto Seguro and elsewhere. And eventually they came to Silicon Valley through our mobility program, and then we brought them over to Stuttgart for Daimler. And so that was a great kind of, I think, process for the startup in the sense that, they got to experience a lot of what the Silicon Valley best practices were here, and they brought it back to the Brazil market. And then eventually we transported the idea out to Stuttgart. And at this point, some pretty heavy hitters from the Daimler team sit on their board, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And so that's kind of the idea is, not only how can we optimize and expedite the process for you going to market, but then after that, how do we scale you globally?
Is there a floor price that you have in mind or some form of a pre-qualification criteria under which you will not take a company if you don't see them, for example, that this is not scalable or the initial investment is too low or something like that? What's the criteria for selecting based on price and investment?
So I think for selecting within the program itself, and I should note, we invest both within, outside, or completely unrelated for our investment. So it's not a requirement to participate for that. But the general question that we have to ask ourselves is what happens if this group has a problem at a global basis? So for example, 2 people with an idea and a dog can't serve out of the Silicon Valley garage they're working, the Singaporean financial institution, right? And so that's the big question. And along the spectrum of where it's probably ideal for them to engage with a corporate or somebody if they are enterprising. I mean, certainly we want an MVP at the very least. Or at least in the process of kind of building out your MVP, certainly some sort of traction relating to maybe 1 or 2 paying clients or referenceable clients. But yeah, the idea is, can you actually, if you were to do this successfully in rendering, say, an offering to this corporate, could you serve them in the next 6 months? And if not, what would it take for you to do that? And so generally the question is, do you have a live beta product or not? After that, and if not, we would probably push them into our incubator program called Startup Camp. And often we see those folks go through that program, graduate, and then come into one of the vertically based programs. But yeah, that's generally the litmus test. Are you able to actually work with the group, and is there something that you have to show for? We see too often an idea that's being pitched that's, and we'll hire that CTO and we'll make sure that first sweep and the proof of concept comes out. Here's the mock-ups. So we really want to make sure that there's something to show for and there's something valuable that corporate can see.
But is it, I hate to use the word, but do you discriminate, if you will, even in a mild sense? Strong word, though, I'll admit, I'll give you that much. But do you discriminate in any sense that this is a worldwide, a fintech play that's maybe happening in Africa or, Brazil versus, let's say, Main Street, USA?
So I think we absolutely do not try to discriminate in any fashion. I think we have well over 7,000 fintech startups listed in our database that we monitor. We have a full team on our venture side that is actively pursuing relationships with them and updates. And so the purpose there is, while they may not, I mean, to be very frank, it's the best time to invest in the startup is prior to to that beta. That's where we have the most leverage. But we don't really think like that. We think more or less, if we do successfully convert this into a product that we can help sell to some of the friends that we work with, what does it look like to be kind of a sexy cap table, and where do we sit within that cap table so they're poised to do well in their A or their B round beyond that. So I'd say we'll opportunistically invest. I've had many circumstances where I think one of the most recent investments we did, I was the first phone call to this one gentleman that had just started this idea. And so, he, I think, just left his company or just had incorporated, and it was the day after. And I am the type that will hound you out and go on your website and get into your contact form and say, hey, give me a call, and then I'll call that number that's listed on the bottom, and then I'll find my LinkedIn contact. So if I'm interested, we'll find you. But at the end of the day, for us, the investment is important so that we can, not only create that opportunity during the program, but through our alumni network and our program thereafter. That's a very interesting way for us to incentivize, the continued business development help that we offer to these startups. And of course, as you know, entrepreneurs are often cyclical, so things come back to us.
Yeah. Do you go on road shows, by the way?
We sure do. So in fact, we had an event in New York at 60 Wall Street, Deutsche Bank, I think about 2 months ago, right around the Consensus Conference, that blockchain conference. And we do this showcase quite often. So we did that again, actually in October of last year in Toronto at Mars, back with Adam and Angie and some of our friends at TD, Deloitte, and elsewhere. And of course, we have a number of different relationships with these banking folks. So often that may mean we actually just set up an event or we'll co-organize events. So you'll see us at BAI's event in Atlanta in the first week of October. You'll see us at Money 2020 with Startup Valley. And a few other events that are coming about. So absolutely, we travel. We do whatever we can to help the startup be successful.
What about Europe and Asia? Do you go there? Do you go to Money 2020 Copenhagen or Fintech Paris or something like that? Or I think Money 2020 Hong Kong is Singapore or Hong Kong is now starting. Singapore,
absolutely. Absolutely. So, in fact, my colleague Omid Nernfar he's our director at Plug and Play Paris with BNP Paribas. He gave a nice talk, and basically posed the question. I'm sorry, I'll probably butcher the title of his talk, but basically, is your corporate innovation, strategy worth it at this moment, or are you just looking at nice startups and giving numbers? And so, we feel at Plug and Play we like to speak softly and carry a big stick, kind of the Churchillian perspective, but we don't like to say what we do. We'd rather just go and do it. So I think, one of the areas that we've been very successful is making sure that not only does Plug and Play have a presence at all of these events, but more importantly, our startups. And so that means, as best as we can, I think we'll put in contact our friends at these organizers. So for example, at Money 2020, we've had a lot of great success with that team there, Andrew Morris and the other folks behind that. So it's a very important element just to socialize what these startups do and put them in front of the people that would be interested to hear about where they're headed.
It's a finger on the pulse, huh?
That's the idea, but man, sleeping on planes and in taxi cabs is not fun. I'm tired.
It's not fun. And anyone who's hearing this thing, it may seem glamorous in movies, but it is anything but. So yes, as a fellow traveler, I can relate. How competitive is the landscape for companies within the United States, and more importantly, companies outside the United States that would like to come on board? What is the process? How long is it usually, and how many times a year do you do it?
Sure. So pretty much all of our verticals will run 2 cohorts per year, and each cohort will be roughly anywhere between 10 and 30 companies, depending on the size of the group of the consortium, as well as kind of the domain. And so in fintech, for example, we're now in the process of our 6th batch. And so that means
how many applicants did you take in this batch, and how many applied?
Sure. So it's pretty much right around 1,000, pretty consistently per cohort. And a lot of the reason why we have such a high number is not because we're perhaps the most exciting or the best at what we do. It's just we do a lot of activities and a lot of work that's sourcing all year round in virtually every single office that we have in the world. And so, in addition to that, by way of events like Money 2020 or others, we make sure that we are there every single time that we can be. And so, through that grouping, it's typically a process where you can apply on our website, plugandplaytechcenter.com/fintech. There's a little application there. These programs run for 3 months. We'll source actively through both of the program timings. We'll kind of shut down and be a little bit quieter for November and December, given that's a kind of a generally crazy time for this industry, as well as retail and a couple other highly relevant industries that would impact kind of whether or not we could actually make something happen during that month. But it's very well proportionately represented globally. Obviously there's a lot of folks that come from the States, but for us, it's not about the numbers; it's about the quality. And I'd have to say, through the years, we've certainly seen an uptick. And I'm a startup myself, so I try and operate under the assumption that I need to get better every single day, along with my team. And we've grown from 2 and 3 people to now about 17, 18 globally, just purely from fintech.
Quite a team you have at Plug and Play. I was going through the thing on your About section.
Yeah, I have to say, a lot of the success here has a lot to do with the folks on my team. So folks like Omid and my other colleague RJ Carver, and my ventures guys George Demooney, Yvonne, and Evan and Sahil upstairs where we work. So we have a fully venture-facing team, which is meant to stay in touch with the startup, understand the startup's needs, help the startup connect to the VCs, help syndicate rounds for them, and then on my side, go ahead.
Do you see yourself expanding outside the U.S. as a base outside the U.S.?
I do. I think as I've been watching some of the trends relating to Silicon Valley's position as the most dominant kind of, I'd say, market for which we've seen startup activity, that's been diminished over the past couple of years. And I think growingly, as we see more and more emphasis on decentralization, yes, I think it's very important to understand that the path is not necessarily going to be a channel straight through the valley anymore. And the locations that we are seeking and that we're excited about, certainly are hubs in each of these markets. So,
what would it be first, East Coast presence or across the pond?
So we're working at New York and London. I can say that we're in earlier stages than those, but we are gung ho. As you saw, we went to Paris. We've been working both with Bank of the West and BNP Paribas for a couple of years now. And we felt like it was a great time as we've been watching not only just the volume of startups tick up in France, but particularly some of the immigration, the French visa program, Vivatech, and some of the other things that they offer are very attractive to startups. So between the Brexit and some of the other, I think, trends that we've watched in the European scene and the pending coming regulations with both PSD2 and some of the other stuff, we're certainly out there. And frankly, the United States is behind in many different areas. So number one, sandbox environments and regulation enabling, I'd say, permissionless innovation or close to that. We're way behind there. Number two, our payment infrastructure is way behind. So there's a lot of things that are generations, if not many generations, beyond the United States. So there's a lot to learn. And frankly, the place where we should be focusing is China. If you've seen the tea leaves and all the activities that relates to the mobile peer-to-peer offerings and how much engagement we've watched, there's a lot to learn. So we try to be humble and listen and watch and see how we can optimize what the best path might be for these startups.
How does India play out in your scheme of things? Because needless to say, in a couple of years, India's population will be bigger than China.
That's right. So India is a very interesting market for a number of reasons. Number one, just relating to the identity push that they've been going forward. So the national identity offering is very, very interesting to watch because that foundation enables a lot of different things from a financial services and kind of a greater perspective. So that plus what we've seen from the digital kind of cash engagement and some of the changes that have occurred from the top-down government, very interesting. Meanwhile, we've seen pretty innovative solutions pop up from AML KYC from remote offerings. So not only is it one of the highestly dense populations in the area, but pretty significant engagement on the cell phone, pretty significant engagement as it may relate to comfortability. While there's still a significant cash-based society, we see this as a huge market and obviously perhaps one of the best talent markets in the world between Bangalore and some of these technical universities. So a lot of our great companies come through there. There's a number of banks that are working on things like ICICI Bank and others that are building out some innovation strategies. So we're paying close attention. We haven't done anything there yet, but it's a fantastic market.
And if I were to get your same pulse on Africa?
So this, I think, is perhaps one of the, Africa and Southeast Asia to me represent perhaps the biggest area through which we can impact financial inclusion and opportunity services. We've made a couple investments over the years. Most recently, a company called Flutterwave. So they just announced the Series A, I think.
Oh, they just raised 10 million.
That's right.
Yeah. Is
So
it one of your incubators?
So they participated in our prior batch, and I mean, frankly, when it comes to the folks that participate in the cohort, because I think the often misconstrued sentiment of an accelerator is, well, you go to accelerator to kind of build your company. I think we're really, if I had to have one specific term, we're really a business accelerator in that sense. So Flutterwave took an investment from us. They've been participating with some of the folks that we work with here, as well as obviously in Africa and elsewhere. They have relationships with some of our other portfolio companies. But yeah, we see general, and I hate to say Africa because I think we should be specific. The relationship and the folks like at Axis Bank, for example, in Nigeria, and some of the challenges that they're working on. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and frankly, it's a time where we have technology that can serve this, and it's already been proven. So if you watch what's happened with M-Pesa and some of the other offerings out there, while there is a delta as it may relate to infrastructure, there's a certain leapfrog opportunity. So from an investment perspective, as well as kind of a general, I'd say, projection of where financial services flows, I mean, that seems to be there in places like Indonesia, the Philippines, and elsewhere. They seem to be a very prime market for an entrepreneur to build something that could really shift how finance works.
And it's heartening to hear that you're based in the U.S., but your eyes and ears and hands are all over the globe, which is great because there is the U.S. just is one country, no doubt, but there are 219 other countries in the world, and the rest of the population lives outside there, and the opportunity is so huge that it's very nice. Kudos to you, sir, to see that you're at least looking in that direction because many of them don't.
Well, I have to say that's why I got into this business. I've been very lucky and had many opportunities to travel throughout the few years here. And, I think traveling, number one, it imposes empathy to understand life is not the same everywhere. And more importantly, it allows you to really, I think, bridge divides. And in this case, it's really a sad situation to see that the opportunity is there for us to serve this market. But the reason why some folks aren't there is because, well, there's not enough money from it. It doesn't make sense to put a brick and mortar bank on every one of the 18,000 islands in Indonesia, or the infrastructure requirement to actually be able to swipe a card somewhere in Nigeria versus, say, Kenya is a very difficult process. So we see infrastructure plays there being very important. And at the end of the day, I think my goal has always been, and my vision has always been here at Plug and Play, is to change the way opportunity is brought. And from my experience, it starts with money. So if I can start in the financial services industry and make an impact there, I feel like the rest will come thereafter.
Are you hiring by any chance?
We sure are. We need a lot of help. So we're hiring both for our activity in Paris. We have a lot of stuff going on here in the Valley. A couple events that'll be coming up. So. We would really love anyone that's interested to shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to sit down or take a call. And we've got a great team. Our team is very, I'd say, very culturally diverse. We have folks from the Middle East, Europe, South America, elsewhere. I'm your typical 30s white guy, so sure, I fit that mold, but I'd like to think that that's
so
not
like
how we
the Emirates plane, right? The crew is multilingual.
That's right, absolutely. We have French speakers. I mean, you name it. We can speak virtually every language.
Very good, sir. Very
Just
good.
stop me.
So, last question before I, ask you for some closing remarks. When is the next round that you'll be looking at? When does that take place? A month, maybe?
Sure. Well, actually, today, August 3rd, is our orientation for the Batch 6. So, folks can apply or reach out to us. We have rolling applications. So anyone that has an interest can come to the website under the Fintech page and ping me, or, I'm happy to share my email, scott@pnptc.com. But we will be sourcing, the next batch for this will be Q1 of 2018. So typically that means applications will probably close somewhere between December and January. I'll have to double check on that. But frankly, just get your information into the website and we can go from there.
Scott, in closing, anything you want to let us know maybe of what can be expected, let's say, not far from now, 2018?
Sure. Well, I am working on a number of areas that are complementary to fintech. So The big event that we'll have that's coming up next is on September 14th here in the Valley. So this will be a cybersecurity event called Pure 150. So it'll be discussing some of the cybersecurity implications relating to financial services and a number of other industries. Obviously, there's a high correlation between the banks and the banks' retail folks and some of the challenges and breach vectors that they see. So if anyone's interested, we should have some pretty good speakers, including John McAfee and some folks from the FBI. So that there'll be some sparks flying there. So that should be kind of fun to watch. And so, yeah, I'd say that's the next one. And then our demo day will come right at the end of that Money 2020 week. So if anyone's going out to Vegas for Money 2020, they'll find us at the Startup Valley. I encourage them to come see some of the startups there. And the VCs include Angela Strange from Andreessen and a few others that will be kind of voting on who will win that. And then on the 26th, October 26th, in Silicon Valley, we invite anyone that would be interested to come out and watch our demo day. We'll have at least 20 to 25 fintech startups, and we'll be announcing a keynote, a professor that's working on some pretty interesting stuff in financial services out of Stanford. So, and in any event, we'd love to have you come here to the Valley. And of course, if you're in Europe, we've got plenty of stuff going on there. So one way or another, get a hold of us through the website.
Very good. We'll make sure that all the dates and the events you've mentioned will be in the show notes. Scott Robinson, thank you very much for taking the time out. Good on you, sir. We'll hopefully our paths will cross again.
Thank you, Faisal. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be on here. This is a great podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.